Hello and welcome to JRock's Pop Culture Revolution. This is episode number 44, if you can believe that. And what today we're going to be talking about, and you're going to love this, is we're going to be talking all about Three's Company, one of my all-time favorite classic TV shows. So let's get into it. I got to tell you, if you were to ask me, to pick like my all-time favorite, TV shows, I'd have to tell you it would go between Happy Days and Three's Company. I remember growing up, and I've talked a lot about this in some of our past episodes, which is that Tuesday night was my favorite night growing up. My favorite night to watch TV when I was much younger. Tuesday night because I remember 8 o'clock. Okay, it was like Happy Days. 8:30, Laverne and Shirley. 9 p.m. and it's all on the same network, ABC, Channel 7, and then following Three's Company at 9, you get Taxi. Now again, like I said, we're talking about Three's Company, and man, I still to this day, I mean, in preparation for this episode, I just watched like a marathon of Three's Company. I've got like if you can believe this, 85 episodes that I taped. I didn't watch all 85 episodes. I watched about 6 or 7 episodes just to kind of get me in the mood. I'm always in the mood for Three's Company. And let's talk about why. Now, let's start off with some basic facts about the show. Okay, some basic facts is, of course, we're talking about Three's Company. The network was ABC. The original running dates were it aired from March 15th, 1979. Excuse me. So the premiere date of this for Three's Company, it premiered on March 15th, 1977, and the final episode ran September 18th, 1984. So that's quite a run. And a lot of shows back then, they were a lot of these shows had many seasons like that if it was successful. Like I said, it had a total of 8 seasons. It was a situation comedy, kind of a farce. A lot of the comedy was based on John Ritter's talent of just physical comedy. And we're going to talk about some of that. The setting for Three's Company was in the city of Santa Monica. It was created by the team at American Television by Don Nichols, Mickey Ross, and Bernie West. These are producers and writers that you would see on other hit TV sitcoms back in the day. And it was based on the British sitcom Man About the House. It starred John Ritter, of course, as Jack Tripper. He was indeed the star of the show. Um, and then the other major stars, of course, were Joyce DeWitt as Janet Wood, Suzanne Summers as Chrissy Snow, Norman Fell and Audra Lindley played the role of Stanley and Helen Roper. Richard Klein played the role of Jack Tripper's neighbor and best friend, Larry Dallas, a used car salesman. Don Knotts, of course, was Ralph Furley, the landlord that moved in when the Ropers sold the apartment building to Ralph's brother, Bart Furley. And Mr. Ralph Furley was the manager slash landlord and ran the daily operations. And he lived in the Ropers' apartment, the downstairs apartment there. You had Priscilla Barnes as Terry. We had Jenny Lee Harrison, who played the role of Cindy Snow. And of course, Anne Wedgeworth in the role of Lana Shears, a very attractive older woman that was just crazy about Jack Tripper, and he was always trying to get away from her. I wish I had a problem like that. Give me a Lana. I would just love that. And now let's talk about what was Three's Company. We've already done that a little bit, but the basic setup of the show was wonderfully simple. I mean, most major funny TV sitcoms usually are something just as simple. I mean, you look at something Seinfeld. It worked because if you ask Jerry Seinfeld what was it about, it's a show about nothing. I mean, you can't get more simple than having a show about nothing. Okay, um, so the basic setup, as I said, was it was just so simple. Um, Jack Tripper, a young culinary student, needs a place to live. He ends up sharing an apartment with two women, Janet Wood, which was played by the wonderful Joyce DeWitt, um, and Chrissy Snow, played by Suzanne Summers. We're going to get into the characters a little bit later, but here's what the problem and the basic setup of the show was. The problem was that the landlord, Stanley Roper, doesn't approve of an unmarried man and two unmarried women living together in his apartment building. So Jack and um, so Jack and Janet tell Stanley that Jack is actually gay, so he doesn't have to worry about anything going on between Jack and the two girls. Um, and because of that, Stanley Roper then allows Jack to move in the apartment building with the two girls. Um, and because Stanley is led to believe that Jack is gay, it allows him to believe that there is nothing romantic going on between Jack and the two girls. The joke is that Jack is actually straight, and virtually everyone except Stanley eventually figures out that this is what is going on. That setup generated the show's trademark comedy misunderstandings, overheard conversations, mistaken identities, people entering rooms at exactly the wrong moment, and characters jumping to widely inappropriate conclusions. The series was an American adaptation of the British sitcom Man About the House, which had premiered in 1973. So, wow. I mean, so, just kind of think about that. Again, Three's Company premieres on ABC in March of 1977, on ABC in 1977. I think a lot of people that obviously seen Three's Company never had seen the British sitcom that it was based on. But I would love to see if I could research on YouTube. I just didn't have the time to do this, but perhaps I will see if I can find anything on YouTube about the original British sitcom that it was based on. Let's talk about why that basic storyline was so controversial at the time. This is one of the most interesting things about the show, okay? Today, three adults sharing an apartment, that are unmarried. It's done all the time. It's not something that was so out of the ordinary, but especially on a major TV network such as ABC back in the 1970s, it was something they did not want to really kind of deal with or talk about. In fact, originally when ABC got offered to do the show, they turned it down because they thought it was too much, it was too risque. It thought it dealt too much with sexual humor. It wasn't until Fred Silverman became the head of ABC that he decided to roll the dice and take a chance with the show. And thank God he did, because otherwise we might not have ever gotten to experience the comedy that was John Ritter and the rest of the cast and the Three's Company gang. But thank God for Fred Silverman coming along at the right time in 1977, and the fact that he was willing to roll the dice with the show and take a chance. So again, as I said, Fred Silverman, who became ABC's programming chief, he decided to really ultimately roll the dice and take a chance with the show. The show arrived during a period when American television was becoming much more willing to discuss sex, dating, unmarried relationships, and changing social attitudes. And it really was I mean, more and more stuff like that was being discussed on TV. I mean, we've talked in some of our past episodes. If you go back all the way to the 1960s, okay, Fred and Wilma Flintstone are the first married couple that you ever see on American TV that actually slept in a bed together. I mean, back before the Flintstones, I mean, go back to a little earlier in the 60s to when Leave It to Beaver was on, okay? Um, you never saw mom and dad sleep. Even if you go back to watching something like Bewitched, I mean, you would even see like on Bewitched, you see Darren and Samantha maybe laying in the bed together, but they were never actually under the covers. They were always like on top of the sheet. Same thing with the Brady Bunch. Whenever you saw mom and dad, Brady in the bedroom, they were always sleep. They were never like under the blankets or under the sheets. They were always on top of the on top of the sheets. They were always wearing their pajamas. And by the 1970s, when ABC premiered Three's Company, attitudes towards sex and stuff like that had really changed. And so it wasn't surprising when they did decide to greenlight the show that Three's Company was a massive hit right away. I mean, because the attitudes were changing in the 1970s about stuff like that. And so also, the show, so it said also Three's Company was fundamentally a farce. Its premise was connected to genuine cultural change at that time. And it said that the museum, get this, the Museum of Broadcast Communications described it as one of the first sitcoms to directly play with the sexual implications of unrelated men and women living together. So that's really, I mean, okay, maybe around the same time, you had like Laverne and Shirley. They were two roommates living together. The main difference, obviously, they were two women living together, not like two women and a man living together. So nobody was thinking that Laverne and Shirley were doing anything sexually. So that was kind of the major difference. And so really, Three's Company really took a lot of chances, and then they were really one of the first TV shows to ever kind of deal with that. And it's just they did a great job at it. Now let's talk about John Ritter, but the star of the show, the reason that me and so many other people tune into Three's Company each week. I will say the supporting cast is just as funny, and it was a great ensemble cast. But let's be honest, John Ritter is why, as Jack Tripper, is why we tuned in every week. And if they'd ever made the mistake of continuing the show without John Ritter, getting rid of him, or if he'd ever left, or it would not have been the same show. Let's be honest. And let's talk about again John Ritter as Jack Tripper. Jack was a culinary student. He was going to school to become a chef and learn how to cook. And that's not a typical thing for most men to do. It's not typically, most men are typically thought of as cooks. And so that kind of went along with him, his farce about making Mr. Roper think that he was gay. So it kind of played into that. But again, even as I sit here and talk to you today, attitudes towards that have totally changed, because now you have just as many men and women going to culinary school and becoming chefs. So that really kind of has changed since the 1970s. And so eventually, by the end of the series, Jack Tripper, gets a chance to get his own restaurant. That was from episode 1, when he meets the girls and moves into the apartment. That's kind of, he lets it be known that that's his dream, is that he's going to school to become a cook, and eventually he would like to one day own his own. Well, it's nice the way they were able to tie that up by the end of the series, and Jack did indeed get his own restaurant. So that's kind of a cool thing that happened by the end of the show when it was canceled, and so another thing is that about Jack Tripper, okay, he was friendly, enthusiastic. very innocent and naive. Most importantly, for the comedy, he was extremely a physical actor. I mean, from what I've heard John Ritter talk about the years and the producers and the writers, Three's Company was a lot like I Love Lucy in that way that John Ritter did a lot of physical comedy and he was great at it. It's one of the things that you tune in for to see him. He did, he just, and even the name Jack Tripper, I think, kind of happened by accident when they were creating the show. I mean, one of the first scenes, he's introducing himself to the two girls, Jan and Chrissy. He's meeting them for the first time in their bathroom. They're not sure who he is. He woke up the night after a party they had for their roommate. They got pregnant and moved out of the apartment, opening the door for Jack Tripper to take her place as a new roommate. He kind of introduces himself, and as he starts to fall back into the bathtub, like, "Oh, hello, I'm Jack Tripper." I think that kind of just innocently happened, that joke right there. And that's how it looks like they came up with the name. Ritter was a master at slapstick, double takes, facial expressions, running, hiding, pretending to understand something that he didn't, pretending to understand something that he did. And that's another thing that Norman Fell as Stanley Roper, Don Knotts as Ralph Furley, and John Ritter as Jack Tripper. They were all great at physical comedy. They all made these great facial stares and looks with their eyes, especially Norman Fell as Stanley Roper and Ralph Furley as as Don Knotts as Ralph Furley. They would roll their eyes, and I remember when Mr. Furley would start to hyperventilate. It was just the funniest thing. Great physical comedy, and all three of those characters together on screen. Those three characters would be interacting with each other. It'd be great physical comedy, just great comedy, period. And the fact that Jack Tripper was so innocent and naive, you have a best friend like Larry Dallas, who's conniving and scheming. A lot of people don't think too highly of Larry, but they often ask Jack, what do you do hanging out with a guy like Larry? And they'd always be telling Larry, why can't you be more like Jack? But I think the two guys kind of, they helped each other in many ways. They hung out together. They had a good time. I think hanging out with Larry taught Jack not to be so naive and innocent, and so there is that. Now, let's talk a little more about John Ritter. Okay, it says, his physical comedy became one of the defining characteristics of Three's Company, as I've discussed. The Television Academy notes that the show's comedy was essentially broad physical farce in the tradition of I Love Lucy, as we have discussed in tonight's episode. Despite the show's more sexually suggestive premise, a lot of people tuned in just for John Ritter's physical comedy. And Ritter wasn't merely a popular sitcom actor. No. He won the Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series in 1984 for his performance as Jack Tripper on Three's Company. Interestingly enough, he would get that Emmy Award in the final season of Three's Company. I mean, what a great send-off, I guess. And I'm not sure if when he received the award, if he knew that was going to be the end of Three's Company or not. Now let's talk about Joyce DeWitt as Janet Wood. Joyce DeWitt played Janet Wood, the sensible roommate. Janet worked at a flower shop and was generally the most grounded of the three. Her personality contrasted nicely with the other roommates. Janet is sensible. Chrissy is ditzy. Jack, physical comedy disaster, basically. Okay, and so that's kind of how they all interacted together. Okay, and then we had, and again, we're talking right now about the original cast. The third roommate, of course, was Suzanne Summers as Chrissy Snow. Suzanne Summers indeed played Chrissy Snow, Chrissy Snow, as we find out. And Chrissy becomes one of the most recognizable sitcom characters of the era. She was characterized as beautiful, extremely cheerful, naive, frequently confused, occasionally surprisingly clever. And let's see, it said that she was, just always kind of misunderstanding things and not understanding a whole lot. Now, in fact, when Three's Company first premiered in the early seasons, they made Chrissy really, really kind of dumb. And so as the series would progress over a course of time, Chrissy went from being really, really dumb to kind of not so dumb, but still had a little bit of a dumb quality to her. But she was overly cheerful, and some of the outfits and the clothing she wore was very kind of like. There's an episode I remember where Chrissy's boss has to talk to her about the way she dresses and not wearing such low cut blouses and skirts. I mean, so that is kind of the original three roommates. Now let's talk a little bit about the Ropers, okay? Because they were a big part of the original cast. So of course, another fascinating part of the show's history is Stanley and Helen Roper. Um, okay, I'll just tell you off the bat. Mrs. Roper comes across as like just a love hungry um, sex starved woman that is always kind of on the make for Mr. Roper. She'd do anything to get him into bed and to light his fire, and very seldom is his fire lit. We'll just put it that way. So they're already kind of at opposites, total opposites. But like any old married couple, they're used to each other. They drive each other crazy, and at the end of the day, they love each other. So um, they had a lot of great kind of back and forth between Mr. and Mrs. Roper. Um, and so again, Stanley Roper was played by Norman Fell, who was a grumpy landlord. Ellen Roper, played by Audra Lindley, was his more outgoing wife. The marriage became a comedy within the comedy. So a big part of the show was you'd have, the girls and Jack, kind of interacting in the apartment upstairs. From time to time, Mr. and Mrs. Roper would come in the apartment for some reason, collect the rent, or just, um, you know, tell Janet and Jack and Chrissy how they were doing and what was going on in their lives. And another part of the show, it would often show a downstairs apartment where the Ropers lived. And just, you would see the everyday kind of type of conversation with life that Mr. and Mrs. Roper had together. And it wasn't always, let's just say, a barrel of laughs, but it really was because, again, you have a married couple here that just they loved each other, they drove each other crazy, and oftentimes they would get sarcastic with one another, and that's where the jokes and everything would come from. And so, from time to time, you'd see stuff happening in the Roper's apartment, and that was the back and forth between the two apartments. That was a big part of the show and why the original series was such a hit. And so Stanley was perpetually irritated, while Helen was flirtatious and frequently frustrated by her husband's lack of interest in romance. They became popular enough to receive their own spinoff, and we'll get into a little of that you know later on tonight. But so that was the Ropers. Now, so let's talk a little more, give you a little more fun facts. So there's some great little trivia facts here I learned. So the theme song was sung by a singer songwriter named Ray Charles, and I will just say it was not that Ray Charles. So when you hear Ray Charles sang the theme song, it was not the same Ray Charles that sang Georgia. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind. The theme and the opening visuals. Okay, now the famous opening scene in the original credits, um, Jack Tripper is riding his bike along Santa Monica Beach, and he sees this beautiful brunette going by. That he tosses his head up to look at her. He thinks she's mighty sexy, if you will, and he falls off the bike. He can't believe she's so hot. Well, it happens to be Suzanne Summers of all people, is the girl that he's looking at. But Suzanne Summers is blonde, but she is in the opening credits. She is the one wearing the brunette wig. Okay, so there is that. And so let's talk about the fact now that everybody loved John Ritter. Okay, so the thing is, I remember coming home when it was announced that John Ritter had passed away. And it was just so sad. I mean, like a lot of people, when the news broke, I broke down and cried. It broke my heart, even as I sit here talking about it, all these years later, because John Ritter, he was a hero of mine. He made me laugh. He was a big part of my life, and not just to me, but to many other people out there. John Ritter will always be Jack Tripper. That's just a simple fact. Um, absolutely. I mean, John Ritter's death on September 11th, 2003, was one of those celebrity deaths that seemed to hit people unusually hard. He was only 54 when he passed away, and the circumstances made it even more shocking. He became ill while rehearsing 8 Simple Rules for Dating My Teenage Daughter, and he died that night from the aorta. He had something going on with his heart, aorta heart attack, something with his aorta, which is a part of the heart. And he wasn't aware of it. He had the condition. And had he known, they could have probably maybe been able to save him. So that's just simple fact of the matter. And then also, Richard Klein, who played his best friend Larry Dowse, apparently how Richard Klein originally came on the show is that him and John Ritter were very much friends in real life before Richard was ever on the show. And initially, Richard Klein was supposed to come on just for like one guest spot, but they got such a great reaction from his little appearance on the show, which is the episode where he initially comes in and he's trying to give the roommates a little dog, and he's introduced as Honest Larry, Jack's best friend, and who's a used car man salesman, and right away people fell in love with Larry. And from what I understood, that episode got so many ratings, and they liked the performance of Richard Klein. They turned him and they turned to his character of Larry into a reoccurring role, and he remained on the series till 1984 when the show went off there. Now, since the show went off air, I can tell you, I'd seen they done like a 40th anniversary special on one of the cable channels celebrating Three's Company. And at that point, John Ritter had very much passed, and you had Jenny Lee Harrison, Priscilla Barnes, Joyce DeWitt, and Richard Klein all come on sharing their memories of Three's Company. Richard Klein on that reunion special, he broke down and cried, and he's like, you know what? He goes, as much fun as I had doing the show and as great as it was, I have wonderful memories of John Ritter, but I can't even watch the old episodes anymore because it just breaks my heart because of what happened to John. I can't even watch the old episodes. So just think about that. Somebody who was a part of a show can't even watch the old episodes. I mean, how kind of sad is that? And so just I think it sometimes we lose our heroes. It's very hard. And again, when I think of the way John Ritter died so tragically young, I just always will think of him as Jack Tripper. That's just kind of the way it is. And let's talk about like the other some other kind of neat facts about the show. So here's kind of the major the original cast, if you will. So we had John Ritter as Jack Tripper. We had Joyce DeWitt as Janet Wood, Suzanne Summers, as I said, as Chrissy Snow. The landlords were, of course, Norman Fell, Stanley Roper. You had Audrey Lindley as Helen Roper. And then Don Knotts, when the Ropers left to do their own spinoff show, The Ropers, um, they brought in legendary TV actor Don Knotts, of course, who'd previously been known from the Andy Griffith Show and had a successful movie career as well following the Andy Griffith Show. They brought him in as a the kind of goofy Ralph Furley, very much a Barney Fife type of character. Then you had Ginny Lee Harrison who came in and replaced Chrissy Snow as her cousin Cindy Snow. Then you had Priscilla Barnes who came in as Terry the nurse, Terry Alden. Of course, Richard Klein, who was Jack's best friend, Larry Dallas. And let's talk about some of Jack's career changes. Jack begins a series as a culinary student. Eventually, he becomes professional chef and opens his own restaurant, Jack's Bistro. I mean, again, Jack Tripper, by the end of his series, he's accomplished his dream that he set out to do in the premiere episode back in 1977. This gave our writers a new location that allowed Jack's character to evolve beyond simply being the guy who lives with two women. But now let's talk about what they did following Three's Company. Three's Company ends. They everything nicely up where Janet meets this guy Philip, who she ends up marrying. So Janet moves out of the apartment, and she's going to go live with her new husband Philip. You get to see Janet get married. Jack Tripper meets a new girl that he falls madly in love with, and he wants to move in with her, okay, into the apartment above his restaurant. And he falls madly in love with her as Three's Company is ending. He asks her to marry him, and she turns him down because she came from a divorced family where her mother and father were divorced when she was very young, and so she's afraid to get married. And Terry, of course, decides to move to Hawaii, and she's going to be a nurse in Hawaii, and that's how they kind of wrap up Three's Company. And as Three's Company ends, it becomes Three's a Crowd, where basically Three's a Crowd only lasted for 2 seasons, was not as successful because you're missing the great ensemble cast. And as great as John Ritter was, and he wanted, I'm sure, to try to have his own show, I think it would have been better to just keep Three's Company going. Maybe the writers and stuff felt that they were tired of it. I don't know, but they wanted to try something new, and I think obviously it wasn't as successful. Then you had Vicki Bradford, the girl that Jack moves into above the restaurant. Her father buys a building where Jack's restaurant is, becomes the new landlord, and he becomes a thorn in their side, if you will. And so that is how Three's Company came to an end. Now, as you can see, Three's Company was a big part of my life, and I wanted to do this. I've been wanting to do a Three's Company episode for a while of this show, and I'm glad I finally did because it will allow us. Because I just could not even talk about everything I want to talk about in tonight's episode. So there will be future Three's Company related episodes where we will maybe in one episode, for example, we can talk about the different characters in detail. We can talk about what happened when Norman Fell and Audrey Lynn left to do the Ropers, and why even that very much like Three's Crowd didn't last. It only lasted 2 seasons. It's kind of funny that the spinoffs only lasted 2 seasons. Maybe we'll get into that one day. But I've had fun looking back on Three's Company tonight. It's one of my all-time favorite shows, probably one of my top 2. I put it right up there with Happy Days. And I always will have fond memory of John Ritter. And even just talking about him tonight kind of brings some tears to my eyes. I'm kind of sad he's no longer here. But I will always light a candle and say thumbs up to John Ritter because he always made me laugh so hard. And I even remember watching Three's Company back in the day with my grandmother. She thought my father reminded her of John Ritter, and um, I don't know. So I just so again, John Ritter will always be Jack Tripper to me, and that's how I will always remember him. I never get tired of Three's Company. It's one of the greatest sitcoms of all time, and I've enjoyed looking back on what the show meant to me and on John Ritter in particular. So, and of course, we can't forget that besides John Ritter passing, a lot of other great actors that were on the show have since passed. Of course, the actors that played the Ropers, they passed away. Don Knotts, of course, passed away. Um, and Wedgeworth, who played Crazy Lana. In fact, I think we're going to have to do a Lana themed episode one day because we did not really get a chance to talk about her tonight. But there's so much more of it we can talk about in future episodes. So thanks for tuning in to episode number 44 tonight of JRock's Babylon. This has been our Three's Company episode. And I think you're just going to have so much fun hearing tonight's episode. It was so much fun looking back. Three's Company is something I never get tired of talking about, as you can see. Bye for now.